Some of this is review, some of it is new, because we've already talked about the formation of the New England and the Middle Colonies in Lesson 3. New Englanders tended to migrate as families instead of individually, because overwhelmingly most of our New Englanders, their founding sort of principles were based in the Congregationalist Puritan faith. They were very organized. They participated in what is called the Athenian model of democracy, better known to us today as the what type of vote? Ooh, what is democracy, bud? Now we're popular vote, right? That's the popular vote. The New England colonies developed an economy based on shipbuilding, notably in Boston, fishing, common god, as we've talked about, lumbering, small-scale subsistence farming. They actually focused a lot on livestock farming in New England, and manufacturing. Rum production, a lot of it was based out of Portland, Maine, but remember, Maine was never a colony, it was part of Massachusetts. Later, New England will go on to become a textile manufacturing region, and when we get into the early New Nation and the first industrial revolution, New England will dominate the textile manufacturing business in America. The New England colonies prospered, reflected the Puritans' strong belief in hard work, Protestant work ethic, and thrift, saving money. New England's colonial society was based on religious standing. Remember, town meetings were the lifeblood of their community. In 1636, as we've discussed before, the Massachusetts Puritans are going to establish Harvard College. Harvard was established to educate Puritan Congregationalist ministers. Its main benefactor was John Harvard. If you ever go to visit Harvard, has anybody visited Harvard before? There's a statue of John Harvard, and they shine his shoe up, and it's like this weird tradition. They don't even really know what he looks like, by the way. It's kind of strange. They'll go on to later teach the classics and law, and they're our first college established in colonial America. The Puritans grew increasingly intolerant of dissenters, as we talked about in Lesson 3. This will lead to groups splintering, right, and founding new colonies like Rhode Island and Connecticut and New Haven and New Hampshire. And ultimately, other groups will leave and go to those colonies who are either banished or they're just sick and tired of the Puritan theocracy in Massachusetts Bay. Remember, Roger Williams is going to lead for the separation of church and state. Very good. And we talked about Thomas Hooker, who goes on to establish the what will become the colony of Connecticut once it merges with New Haven. So New England law was very strict and very severe. Public beatings, right? There were fines and penalties levied against people. There were also laws that were put into place that basically allowed for public humiliation. Like, for example, an adulterous woman caught in an affair was required to wear a letter A on the bosom of her dress for adultery. This will be captured in the American classic, The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Interestingly enough, this is actually based off of a real Congregationalist woman from New England, Mary Bailey Beadle, which I find pretty interesting. Okay, anybody ever read The Scarlet Letter by Hawthorne? Okay, a little bit, yeah. It's wordy, right? It's kind of nuts. I don't have anything against Hawthorne, but a lot of people are like, boo Hawthorne. But a lot of really great, early American literary works came from Hawthorne. Yeah.
Is that the same Hawthorne from, The Crucible? Like the
Yes. Well, no. The play The Crucible is written years later.
Well,
Yeah,
is this
but it's
based
based,
off the
yeah.
character? Because he was a real judge.
The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Harvard, if you ever get a chance and you're in Boston, pop over to Harvard. Just a train away. So the Halfway Covenant and the Salem Witch Trials. Bum, bum, bum. After a couple of generations in Massachusetts Bay, the Puritans are a little disturbed because they don't feel like their children are pious and religious enough. And they're trying to figure out how to get their parishioners to be more active, notably their offspring. This doesn't happen immediately, but it happens over time. So to try to combat this, about 1660s or so, the Puritans start to deliver this new type of sermon called the Jeremiads. These are like hellfire and brimstone sermons where everybody was basically told that they were damned to hell if they didn't repent and do good works. How do you think this goes over with a lot of the parishioners? Not really great, right? They're kind of over it. This is going to push people away from the church. One of the most famous of these is Jonathan Edwards. It's actually the most famous. Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, where Edwards likens man to a spider dangling over a fire, and at any given time can be cast into the flames if they do not repent. That's not even like the craziest rhetoric from him. We'll talk more about this when we get into the Great Awakening. So all this hellfire and brimstone starts to wear thin, and the Jeremiads aren't super popular with the parishioners. Interestingly enough, and paradoxically, ministers start a new formula in the 1660s called the Halfway Covenant. And the Halfway Covenant kind of goes like this. You may be a sinner and you may be one that is not a visible saint. But if you come to church and you repent and you try hard to be a visible saint, you may be able to seek salvation. This is kind of weird, right? Because this goes against the most basic principles of Calvinism, predestination. But they ran with it. And I wouldn't say that it numbers shot up. Really, we're going to start to see numbers rise later during the First Great Awakening. So the Halfway Covenant is going to actually end up creating more controversy among church leaders than it does actually bringing more people into the church, right? So by the time we get to the early 1690s, a lot of issues are brewing in Massachusetts Bay Colony, no pun intended with the witch trials here. You've got you got religious leaders that don't agree with each other. You've got preachers that don't agree. You've got people in the community that don't want to be a part of this. You also have rivalries between powerful families over control of land. And you start to see this sort of scenario where there are a lot of haves and have-nots in these colonies. You also have a massive division in the Salem colony, in the Salem village itself. So in the early 1690s, a group of middle school girls, middle school age, like 9 to 11-year-olds. I mean, who had a cringeworthy moment in middle school? I think we can all raise our hand on that. Thank you for your honesty. These girls go through this sort of tarot card voodoo ceremony with a West African slave by the name, she's probably from the Caribbean, but by way of West Africa, by the name of Tituba. And After all this goes down, these girls start to convulse. They start to have hallucinations. They're barking like dogs. They're doing all this crazy stuff. And they're blaming this woman for bewitching them. Well, Tituba is questioned, put on trial, and she'll ultimately admit, like, yeah, we did this, but I'm not the only person that is responsible for the heresy and the bewitching that's going on in Salem Village. So Tituba, blames some other folks. And then this just cascades where everybody's kind of blaming everybody. Like, you're a witch. No, you're a witch. Right? Well, like over 100 people get arrested. And it was like a total kangaroo court. If you admitted, yep, I'm a witch, I'm a tool of the devil, they would just throw you back in jail. But if you maintained your innocence and other people accused you of witchcraft, you were executed. Ultimately, 19 were hanged. One person was pressed to death, meaning they had rocks stacked on them until they died. 2 dogs were executed. What a shame. And this thing just spirals way out of control. Around 50 people were confined to jail for long-term sentencing. And ultimately, this all comes to an end for a variety of reasons. The main reason it comes to an end is because the royal governor of Massachusetts, his wife was accused of witchcraft, and he's like, okay, enough's enough. We're done with it. Another reason it comes to an end is because some prominent families, their family members are being accused of witchcraft. Also, what we often forget about that is happening simultaneously with the witch trials is the Glorious Revolution. And once the Glorious Revolution comes to fruition and William and Mary take the throne, Massachusetts and Plymouth come together as one, regain control of their charter, and now you no longer have to be a member of what to vote? The church. See where I'm going with this? So there's a lot of different factors. However, in the last 20 years, scientists have pointed to the ergot theory, or ergot theory. Has anyone ever heard of ergot before? It is a mold that grows in oversaturated rye. And the village of Salem was a place that produced rye. Well, ergot, that mold, has some of the same side effects of LSD. Hallucinations, contortions, erratic, hysterical behavior. So were the girls tripping? We don't know. But it is a theory. Or was this a prank that just got way out of hand? 20 people died and 2 dogs. Salem witch trials is one of the most controversial social and political events of all of colonial America. And it's one that people are still researching and trying to get to the bottom of all these years later. All because of children. Okay, so witchcraft at Salem Village. Okay, life in the Middle Colonies. The Middle Colonies, remember, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. We kind of tend to pull Maryland into the Southern colonial category. These economies were based on shipbuilding, small-scale farming, lots of grain with the exception of Delaware that grew tobacco, and trade. This was a merchant-based economy, notably in 2 locations, New York and Philadelphia. These 2 became key commercial port cities, and they also became destinations because people knew that the social structure was more flexible in these locations, and they had a goal of getting there so they could participate in free enterprise or free religion. or the ability to just have a more relaxed social structure. The middle colonies were also home to multiple religious groups. Quakers were the Religious Society of Friends in Pennsylvania, Jews, French Huguenots, and many others in New York, Presbyterians in New Jersey. New Jersey also had a number of Anglicans. There's also another group I'm going to talk a little bit about later that settled in New Jersey. I'm sorry. And they are going to be the Arminians. They're referred to as the Dutch Reformists. They go on to establish another early college in America, in New Jersey. Not Princeton, but New Jersey College, anyone? Nobody? Has anyone out there ever heard of Rutgers before? Okay, I like that. Rutgers, originally named Queens College. Most people don't think like Rutgers was an early American college, but it was. So, rural life in colonial America. Remember, a very small group of European settlers that settled in the Delaware River Valley as Swedes left a lasting legacy with this piece of colonial architecture, and that is the log cabin. Why was the log cabin a great dwelling? What did you have a lot of in colonial America? You had a lot of wood, right? You had available timber, stones, the ability to make brick. A log cabin was the perfect dwelling for the backcountry. Yeah. Swedes brought it over, yeah. Yep. Okay, so now we move to the Scots-Irish. They made up about 7% of the colonial population. It's estimated that at the end of the colonial period and at the dawn of the American Revolution, there was about 175,000 Scots-Irish living in the American colonies. Overwhelmingly, most of them were Presbyterian, and many of them were pioneers. Most of the Scots-Irish had been, pushed out of Scotland, because remember, the Presbyterian faith comes about, it's offensive to the Anglicans, and they're going to push them to Ulster, Ireland, and Northern Ireland. But then this creates another problem because the Presbyterians' faith is also offensive to the Catholics in Northern Ireland. So the Scots-Irish are predominantly Scottish, though there will be intermingling between the Scots and the Irish. They will raise their own money for passage to America. They don't get a land grant. They're not like the Quakers. And they set their sights on Pennsylvania because the Quakers allowed for religious freedom. So for anyone out there, like myself, who has Scots-Irish ancestry, there's a pretty good chance that your Scots-Irish ancestors went through Pennsylvania and then made their way elsewhere, whether it be Western Maryland or the Shenandoah Valley or Appalachia or Western Carolina. That's just pretty much how it went. In the Shenandoah Valley and in the backcountry of colonial America, the Scots-Irish were constantly quarreling with the natives. Notably, there's a tribe that they battled with quite a bit in Pennsylvania and Virginia and Maryland called the Susquehanna. And there's one particularly bad incident that occurred that is called the Lehigh Valley Massacre, where the Susquehanna ripped through, a bunch of Scots, Irish, and German settlers died. And to gain vengeance and revenge for this attack, a vigilante group of Scots, Irish settlers known as the Paxton Boys marched into Philadelphia and killed 21 peaceful Conestoga Susquehanna who had an alliance with Quakers. This creates major problems moving forward between not only the Scots-Irish and the natives, but also the Quakers and the natives in the region. Scots-Irish settlers were also part of the North Carolina Regulator Movement, which was a war that was fought against the Tuscarora, who would be defeated and ultimately moved north. Those that survived would join the Iroquois. And later, down the road, this group of Scots-Irish are going to battle the British in Carolina over tax collection. This is kind of insane when you think about it. It's crazy how much the events of Lexington and Concord eclipse all the other events that are going on at the start of the Revolution. Because there's tension in Virginia, there's tension in North Carolina, among other places. But the first shots fired in Lexington, Massachusetts, outside of Boston, and that's kind of our default on where the Revolution begins. The Scots-Irish were known to be very hot-headed and independent. Many became patriots. Bless you. One of our most fiery Scots-Irish Virginians famously gave "Give me liberty or give me death" speech at St. John's Church. Who was that guy? Patrick Henry. Very good. All right. So we have the Paxton Boys and the Conestoga Massacre here in Philadelphia. Okay, so a mingling of the races. Germans accounted for about 6% of the population. This is an estimated 150,000 at the dawn of the Revolution. Most were Protestant, primarily Lutheran. And to this day, if you were to go to parts of Pennsylvania or Maryland or Virginia, you're not going to have a hard time finding a Lutheran church. I mean, if you go into the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, it's very easy to find a Presbyterian, Lutheran, Baptist, or Methodist church. They're in pretty much every town because this is where most of those people settled. They were often called the Pennsylvania Dutch, not Dutch. Pennsylvania Deutsch. Are you all familiar with Amish country? Lancaster, Pennsylvania, yeah, York. You've been there. That's Pennsylvania Dutch territory, not Dutch, Deutsch. Yeah. So I wonder how many people are like sitting there in that area. They're like, "This food is so German." Yeah, it is German because it's that lineage is handed down. All right, cool. Anybody else been over there? All right, we'll talk about the Amish later. Am I good? Beautiful. Beautiful. Again, about 7% were Scots-Irish. 5% are what we would consider multicultural European. Okay, so French Huguenots, Welsh, Dutch, Swedes, Jews, Irish, Swiss, Finns. By 1775, 30% were of African descent, either indentured servants, enslaved, or free black. However, the majority of this population, probably somewhere between 20 to 25%, probably close to 25%, were enslaved. Americans were becoming a mixed melting pot even before the American Revolution. At the dawn of the American Revolution, 52% of the population in the colonies was English. Now, it's the majority, but still, you have a lot of other groups that have settled by now, voluntarily or involuntarily. So this is a handy map to explain who was settling where. The pink, English. It's all over. That mustard color, Scots-Irish. In the backcountry, Western Pennsylvania, Shenandoah Valley, Appalachia, Western Carolina, parts of New Jersey. The red, German, Pennsylvania, Maryland, parts of New York. The Dutch, predominantly New York and New Jersey. And then, of course, African, predominantly in the South, but everywhere. All right. Any questions up to this point? Is everybody good?
Why were they predominantly in the South? Yeah.
Due to chattel slavery and the plantation-style economy that was established in the South, notably for cash crops. So the breakdown of colonial society. America was a land of opportunity. Anyone willing to work hard could possibly go from rags to riches. And again, this isn't for everybody, but there are people that would have never had these prospects had they stayed in England. A really great example is Ben Franklin. Remember, he's born in Boston to a large family, done his school career is done at the age of 10, becomes a candle making apprentice, goes on to become an apprentice as a printer under his brother, and then at the age of 17 goes his own way to Philadelphia. Class differences did emerge as small groups of aristocrats made up primarily of rich farmers, merchants, officials, and clergy will dominate colonial politics and society. This is not just confined to Virginia. But remember, the FFVs, the first families of Virginia, they were the major power brokers in colonial Virginia. Rum, whiskey, weapons, and goods in the 1700s enriched merchants in New England and middle colonies during this period of time. That is why Philadelphia and New York City become the two commercial trade ports in the Middle Atlantic. Smuggling also became big business because people were trying to either get around or just outright ignore the navigation acts to trade with other consumers beyond the British Crown. Yeoman farmers or small farmers made up the majority of colonial Americans. They owned land. In some cases, they owned slaves, but in most cases, they just had large families. Landless whites who owned no land either worked for a landowner or rented land in hopes of one day buying that land. This is going to be the system we're going to talk about down the road later, called sharecropping and tenant farming. Indentured servants were the paupers and criminals sent to the New World. It's kind of sad to call them outright criminals because a lot of them were just debtors. But remember, that system was phased out in the early 1700s. Slaves were at the bottom of the social ladder with no rights or hope of moving up unless they gained freedom. But if they gained freedom, really the only opportunity they might have is to own some land. They certainly did not have any rights. And as the slave codes began to get passed, they would have to adhere to the slave codes as well. And this became a divisive issue. Not all of the colonies wanted to continue on with the slave system. There were multiple occasions in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and other colonies where the institution of slavery was attempted to be abolished. However, the Parliamentary Privy Council stepped in and blocked those laws. It's kind of crazy. You're fine. It's really crazy to think of like how different things would have been had these colonies abolished slavery on their own accord. Okay, so the colonial merchant class. We also have a really important person involved here too. We don't only have colonial merchants and soldiers, we also have a very important artisan. Do you remember what a barrel maker was called? Did we talk about that before? A cooper. That was big business. Even today, a skilled barrel maker is a sought after skill. Why would barrel making be so big in the colonies? You got to move everything in barrels. That is your principal way of transporting goods.
COO or COO?
C. Cooper, C-O-P-P-E-R. Wait, hold on, sorry. C-O-O-P-E-R. C-O-O-P-E-R, sorry.
I was like, what?
What?